Uh-oh.
Okay, we'll start with this. A look at the current state at featherweight, 126 pounds, and how the division might stack up in a few months, as there are a lot of moving parts there. There is a lot happening. We know that Nina Menka became IBF champion in her last fight. Don't know what she's up to right now, but we do know what Skye Nicholson is up to.
What's she up to?
She's about to face her mandatory challenger, an unbeaten Tiaria Brown of America, March 22nd.
In Australia.
And I expect Skye Nicholson to win that fight. I expect Skye to emerge the victor and retain the green and gold belt.
That same month, unbeaten Karis Artingstall will be taking on Raven Chapman at the Royal Albert Hall on the undercard of Jonas versus Price.
This will be Karis Artingstall's first fight in over a year's time. We haven't seen her in a while, and she decided to go with a live one for her next outing. This will be happening next month on the 3rd, whereas Skye Nicholson's fight will be happening later on the 22nd.
Amanda Serrano.
Rumors abound. It's conceivable that Amandia might end up facing Katie Taylor for a third time in her next outing, presumably at 140 pounds, where their last fight took place. Don't know for sure. It's all subject to speculation, but it's conceivable that if those rumors check out, she may end up dropping both the WBA and WBO titles. And if she does, Spain's own Jennifer Morandia is ranked as the WBA's interim champion, most in line to be elevated should the full title go vacant. Behind her is France's own Emma Gangara. She is the WBA gold champion. It's conceivable that if Amanda drops the full title, it might come down to Jennifer and Emma to decide who the next WBA champion is going to be.
What about the WBO?
A familiar face in former champion Sarah Mahfoud. She is ranked at number 1 via the WBO. Argentina's own Lucrecia Monzur is ranked at number 2. In a situation where Amanda drops the WBO title, these are the two highest ranked contenders, most in line to become full champions.
It looks like Sarah of Denmark has positioned herself to become a 2-time featherweight champion, and if she does,
what would be ideal is for the winner of Karis Artingstall versus Raven Chapman to go after her, to go after either that number 1 spot that Sarah currently holds, or the title, the WBO title, should it go vacant and Sarah wins it.
What would be ideal?
To set this division ablaze, the winner of this fight should go after Sarah or Nina Menka, who already is IBF champion at this weight. Make her an offer she can't refuse, then take what she's got.
Things could look very different at 126 pounds in a few months.
But that is the lay of the land, and what could be the byproduct of Amandia Serrano going into a Taylor trilogy and dropping her belts as a result. If that happens, that's how things might stack up.
Elsewhere in the world of boxing, earlier today, Queensberry Promotions announced their spring schedule moving forward now that they're migrating from TNT over to DAZN. Josh Taylor versus Echo Essuman, Lee Wood versus Anthony Kakache, Dillian Whyte versus Joyce?
We talked about the Lee Wood versus Anthony Kakache fight just the other day, and it didn't even dawn on me that it might be a Queensberry Promotions show. We haven't seen Lee Wood in a while. It's been over a year since he beat Josh Warrington. Given the amount of time that he's been away, and this being a Queensberry Promotions show, I guess what that means is that Lee Wood has separated from Matchroom, and he's not with them anymore. I believe this will be a lucrative card, a lucrative fight for Queensberry, as Lee Wood is a cult favorite, and this fight is going down in Nottingham. his neck of the woods, but Anthony Cacace is riding high. He's buzzing right now.
He's got momentum going in with wins, back-to-back wins over Joe Cordelia, Josh Warrington.
Very soon, Lee Wood, because I do think he's going to beat Lee Wood. Anthony Cacace is not the kind of guy you get off the couch to fight, and that's what Lee Wood is doing. Over a year out from his last outing,
the edge goes to Anthony, the more active fighter going in.
Over to the welterweight division, where former undisputed champion Josh Taylor is set to make his welterweight debut in May in what is a homecoming show.
Guy that should have moved up there a long time ago.
Josh Taylor looks to make a splash at welterweight by taking on former British champion Essuman in Glasgow, Scotland, this May in his own neck of the woods. The pair will headline Queensberry Promotions' third scheduled show on DAZN, with Frank Warren announcing his Land of the Brave card on social media earlier today. The former undisputed super lightweight king Taylor, 19-2 with 13 KOs, has not fought in Glasgow since his highly controversial split decision win over Jack Catterall back in 2022. The following year, he suffered his first professional blemish to Teofimo Lopez, who ultimately produced a dazzling performance to outpoint the highly accomplished Scotsman. The Tartan Tornado then fell short in his fiercely anticipated rematch against Catterall last May, with the judges' scorecards offering a more accurate reflection than what was produced immediately after their first meeting.
There have been rumors for weeks that he was going to go to Matchroom. He decided to go to Queensberry, and perhaps that's the right decision, since so much of what Queensberry is doing right now is centered around the UK boxing scene. They're not as international as Matchroom is. So if you're a fighter that's from over there, Queensberry, it's where you need to be.
Essuman, 21-1 with 8 KOs, has amassed 2 comprehensive victories since losing the British and Commonwealth titles to Harry Scarf in 2023. In doing so, the Engine reminded fans, even at age 35, his relentless punch output remains a problem for any fighter at 147. And given Josh Taylor's mean streak, his penchant for aggressiveness, this promises to be an all-action shootout.
If you find yourself wondering what does Josh Taylor have left given his run of form in his last 2 outings, Essuman will answer that question.
I think that Josh Taylor, right after the first Jack Catterall fight, maybe he should have moved up to welterweight then, because he was always very big for super lightweight, and not having to boil down to 140 perhaps would have been better for him. But he stays at 140, loses to Teofimo, then he loses to Jack in the rematch, which accents what I'm talking about. Long gone is the Tartan Tornado that we saw in the World Boxing Super Series, and it could be because he stayed at 140 too long. Constantly putting your body through that has an adverse effect on it that's hard to shake off, and it manifests in your performances. Josh's feet look a lot heavier than they used to.
He's lost his bounce.
And with that, his explosiveness. This is a guy who used to stay on his toes, bouncing in and out of range, throwing leaping hooks and leaping uppercuts. He's not as able to do that as he used to be. His feet ain't what they were.
He signed to Queensberry.
I half expected him to go to Matchroom, maybe work towards a Conor-Ben fight, a Conor-Ben showdown at welterweight, but with Conor moving up the middle for the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, I guess that ruled that out and made it that much more easy for Josh to go to Queensberry.
And like I said, if you're a UK-based fighter, perhaps you're better off at Queensberry because Matchroom is a bit more international.
Over to the Whyte versus Joyce card, the undercard, where Lawrence Okoli will be taking on Richard Riakporhe, settling affairs with him. A fight that was more or less built on Boxer when they were both over there and they were both at cruiserweight.
I don't think anybody expected that Chris Billum Smith would beat them both. I didn't expect it.
Which essentially ruined those plans, though only momentarily, as they are picking up where they left off at heavyweight. Remember, Lawrence is competing and campaigning as a heavyweight now.
Crawford.
I like the fight, even though I don't necessarily think it's conducive towards Lawrence's development as a heavyweight. There was a rumor for some weeks that he may be facing Cuban danger man Luis Ortiz. That turned into rumors about this fight, which we talked about in a previous video.
Tail of the tape, in terms of height, they're about even, but in terms of length, in terms of wingspan, Lawrence has more of that.
82-inch wingspan to Richard Riakporhe's 77-inch wingspan. Richard is 35, whereas Lawrence is 30. 132 with more around the spare tire.
Put on considerable size since moving up to heavyweight.
He's got all the momentum going in, coming off of 2 consecutive wins, whereas Richard Riakporhe has not fought since he was dominated, out-hustled by Chris Billum Smith. I think he's about to get dominated by Lawrence Okolie. I saw Richard at the press conference, and I don't like to read too much into these things, but Richard looked a bit defeated and dejected already.
Yeah, sticking it in them old broads that do that to you.
Awkward references from Lawrence Okolie to Richard's sexual relationship with a senior citizen in Madonna. There was a time when she was a sex symbol.
Now she's sapping Richard's life force.
I like Lawrence to win the fight.
Joyce versus Whyte.
A fight we talked about right here on the channel just a few days ago based on some rumors I heard. It turns out those rumors were true. And I ain't too good to watch these two guys beat the hell out of each other. Dillian Whyte is coming off of 3 consecutive victories. A win over Jermaine Franklin, then Christian Hammer, then more recently Ebenezer Tete, whereas Joyce is still coming off that upset loss to an aged Derek Chisora.
39 years old to Dillian Whyte, who's 36.
Standing in at 6'6" to Dillian Whyte, who stands in at about 6'4". Joe's got an 80-inch wingspan.
He's got more reach than Dillian.
I like the fight. I ain't too good to see these two guys beat the hell out of each other. And with fighters like this, you don't need a belt to sell it. You don't need an alphabet title.
I like that David Adilier is also on the undercard. If he makes it through his fight on the undercard of this show, perhaps he can graduate to face the winner of Okolie versus Riakporhe or the winner of this fight.
Queensberry Promotions really is where the heavyweights are. Now you got Dillian Whyte over there, Joyce, David Adilier, Fabio Wardley,
Moses Atalma,
Daniel Dubois. That in the absence of Tyson Fury, who has seemingly walked away from the sport, seemingly retired, they've got more than enough guys to take his place.
Strong heavyweight stable.
Derek Chisora was in action this past weekend opposite the ring Otto Wallin, who he knocked down 2 times and decisioned. It's conceivable that the winner of Whyte versus Joyce may move on to a Derek Chisora rematch.
This weekend's fight for Derek was originally billed as his last dance, his last fight in the UK, but he has since walked back those claims, and I think it's with the winner of this fight in mind. You could fight Dillian Whyte if he wins. You could fight Joyce. Give him a rematch.
The fight.
I don't know that I can count out Joyce here, because unless you have the kind of one-hitter-quitter power to get him out of there...
He's going to try to mow you down. And it's not like Dillian Whyte looked all that great in his last fight with Ebenezer Tete. He didn't.
So this is all about who's got more left to give. Dillian lost 3 fights in his career. Joe lost 3.
Joe's fall from grace was perhaps a bit harder because so many thought of him as a modern incarnation of George Foreman. There were those people. I didn't buy into that hype.
But Teddy Atlas did. He's the one who made that parallel.
Joe is about 3 years older than Dillian Whyte. He's knocking on 40, and it's a hard 40. All of the miles on the odometer he amassed in his amateur career, now his pro career, those 2 knockout losses to Zile Chang, it's all miles on the odometer.
Who's got better punch resistance, Joyce or Dillian Whyte?
Yeah, Joe's been knocked out 2 times, he has, but every single loss Dillian Whyte has was a knockout loss. The loss to Povetkin, the loss to Anthony Joshua, to Fury.
He's never had the best punch resistance, Dillian Whyte, but he has put more distance between himself and his losses than Joe has put between himself and his. Remember, Dillian Whyte is coming off of 3 consecutive wins.
He's on a 3-fight winning streak in what looks to me to be a 50-50 fight. And I ain't too good to watch it. I ain't too good to enjoy it. You don't need a belt to sell me this one.
We're waiting to see kind of what Usyk does and what his plan is and how things are going to fall there. But we need to have a plan if he does something and if he doesn't, and we're working on a few different things and keeping all options open, really. There's a number we're playing around with, mostly within that WBA region, because I want to stay at the #1 spot, stay in that top tier place, because if the belts do fragment or mandatories are called or whatever else, I want to be in the pole position.
Unbeaten Fabio Wardley, another one of Queensberry's prized stallions in the heavyweight division, of which they've got a few, and he's mapping out his next move. He's ranked #1 via the WBA. Ahead of him is Bulgaria's own former Olympian Kubrat Pulev,
a remnant of the Klitschko era. He just so happens to have a secondary version of the WBA title, the full one that Alexander Usyk still holds. Theoretically, if Fabio gets him in the ring, he can then get Usyk in the ring. Though getting Usyk in the ring, I don't think that's really the end game for Fabio. I don't think that's what him and his team want. What they want is to get in position so that if and when Usyk drops that WBA title, they get elevated to full champion.
There it is.
I have a high opinion of Fabio Wardley, who I think has more than proven himself at British level. Now I think he needs to prove himself at European level. And with Kubrat Pulev, he can do that. He's got a WBA world title, but it's really just the secondary title. I think that's the perfect guy for Fabio right now.
The perfect fight.
The caveat is, it only gets more difficult, and it only gets more dangerous from here. You'll notice that ranked right behind Fabio Wardley is Martin Bakole. Martin Bakole, who's going the IBF route. He's fighting in an eliminator against Efe Ajagba. But you see that Fabio would be someone that's on Martin's radar. He would also be on Michael Hunter's radar. Those are the top 3 seeds in the WBA's current rank standings. For Fabio, who has no real amateur experience, just a few white-collar fights, it really only gets more difficult and dangerous from here. Can he handle it?
I don't know.
The saving grace is he's in the right place for a British fighter, a British heavyweight. He could always target the winner of Whyte versus Joyce. He could always target the winner of Okoli versus Riakporhe.
He's at Queensberry with the rest of them.
That if things are getting too hairy via the WBA, you can always go another route, the money route. Any one of those aforementioned fights with those fighters would be a money fight in the UK.
You can do that.
The British boxing scene, especially at heavyweight, is bubbling right now to where you don't necessarily need an alphabet title to make a decent-sized purse. And many were afraid that with everything happening in Saudi and Turkey's involvement in the sport of boxing, that all the good fights and all the good fighters would be outsourced to Saudi. You have a string of good fights here
To fill the void.
There will always be a need for a domestic boxing scene because that's where the fighters and the big fights are built. You can never get rid of that.
An essential cog in the machine.
Fabio Wardley seems to be taking his time and waiting things out a bit. I expect that Frank and George Warren should be able to get him that Kubrat Pulev fight. For a guy Kubrat Pulev's age, who's still hanging around and still has some version of an alphabet title, well, that's why you got it. So you can parlay it into a decent-sized purse. You can do that with Fabio.
Even exchange.
Fabio gets his crack at the apple, you get a decent-sized purse.
Everybody wins. Sort of.
It's a good acid test for Fabio Wardley. Kubrat Pulev is a former Olympian who's been around for years. He's durable, he knows his way around the ring, and even though he's up there in age, he can push back, he can fight.
Fabio's on a great run, but a lot of the guys that he beat, David Adelaide, Fraser Clark,
that's British level. Now he's got to prove himself at European level, subsequently world level, and like I said, it doesn't get easier from here, it gets harder.
That's what she said.
The old saying goes, nothing worth having ever came easy.